Do you remember those cheap dinners only your grandparents knew how to make? Back then, a few scraps, a little butter, and a lot of care could fill every plate and heart at the table. When did we forget how to make so little feel like enough? Potato soup with onions and milk was the meal that could fix almost anything. When the cupboards were nearly bare and payday was still far away, this humble soup stood like a quiet hero. A few potatoes, an onion, and a bit of milk were all it took to fill stomachs and calm worries. The smell of onions sizzling in butter or bacon grease drifted through the kitchen, wrapping the room in comfort. Potatoes were peeled and chopped, dropped into a bubbling pot of water, and left to soften until the broth turned cloudy and fragrant. A splash of milk turned it silky, while salt and pepper gave it life. Some added a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Others tossed in a scrap of leftover ham or a pat of butter for richness. It was simple, cheap, and perfect, made not to impress but to sustain. Grandparents called it poor man's cream soup, yet no one felt poor eating it. It was warm, filling, and tasted like kindness itself. Around the table, spoons clinked against bowls, laughter echoed between bites, and for a moment, the world outside felt manageable. Potato soup was more than food. It was faith in a pot, made from little but meaning everything. Cabbage and sausage skillet was the kind of dinner that turned struggle into satisfaction. A single head of cabbage, cheap and sturdy, could feed a whole family when paired with a few slices of sausage or hot dogs. Grandmothers fried the sausage first, letting the grease flavor the pan, then tossed in ribbons of cabbage that sizzled and softened. The sound of it frying was enough to make mouths water, a tune of thrift and triumph. The smell filled the house, smoky, savory, and sweet all at once. Potatoes or onions sometimes joined the mix, stretching it further while adding depth. Served hot from the skillet, it was hearty and humble, with each bite carrying flavor far greater than its cost. This meal didn't come from plenty, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Families ate together, full and grateful, proving that good food didn't need much, only love, heat, and a little time. Cornbread and beans was the supper of survivors, the backbone of countless working families who knew how to turn little into plenty. The beans simmered low and slow, soaking up every bit of flavor from scraps of onion, bacon, or a precious ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. The longer they cooked, the richer they became, filling the home with a deep, savory scent that promised satisfaction. Cornbread baked nearby, its golden crust rising in the oven, the smell of butter and cornmeal mixing perfectly with the aroma of beans on the stove. When dinner was ready, families gathered close, crumbling the cornbread right into their bowls to soak up the thick broth. It wasn't just filling, it was fulfilling, warming both the body and the spirit. Some families added vinegar, others sprinkled sugar, but every household had its way of making it just right. Cornbread and beans told a story of endurance and community, of hard hands and full hearts. It wasn't luxury, it was life, steady and sustaining, passed from one generation to the next as a lesson in gratitude and grace. It reminded everyone that love, like good beans, only grows stronger the longer it's tended. Creamed peas on toast was the quiet triumph of the Thrifty kitchen, where love turned scarcity into satisfaction. When meat ran out, mothers reached for canned peas, butter, and a little flour to make magic happen. The butter melted into the pan, bubbling with the promise of warmth, and a spoonful of flour thickened it into a creamy roux. A splash of milk turned everything smooth and velvety, coating each green pea in a blanket of comfort. The toast, simple white bread browned on a pan or in the oven, waited like a canvas for the sauce to spill across it. The smell was gentle, buttery, and sweet, the kind that made a house feel like home. It was a meal made in minutes but remembered for years. Families sat together at small tables, passing plates with gratitude and quiet joy. It was humble, yes, but never empty. It fed both hunger and hope. Creamed peas on toast was more than a supper. It was a reminder that gentleness in cooking could make even the hardest days feel soft again. Fried bologna steaks were the working family's luxury, served with pride and no apology. Bologna came cheap and lasted long, and when sliced thick and fried in a hot skillet, it became something better than anyone expected. The edges curled and browned as they sizzled, crisping in their own salty fat until the kitchen filled with the smell of smoky comfort. Some families added onions, letting them caramelize right alongside, while others poured milk and flour into the pan to make a rich gravy from the drippings. Served over mashed potatoes or tucked into a sandwich, fried bologna was more than food. It was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Kids loved its crisp edges. Parents loved that it stretched $1 and still filled every belly. For families who worked hard and had little to spare, this meal was both dignity and delight. Every bite was a reminder that care and creativity could turn the simplest things into something worth remembering. Fried bologna wasn't a compromise. It was proof that pride could be pan-fried and served hot, one slice at a time. Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes, a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph. Vegetable soup from kitchen scraps was pure genius born from necessity, a pot of everything and nothing all at once. Every peel, every end, every leftover carrot, potato, or onion found its way into the bubbling broth. Grandparent saved the bones from roasts, the wilted greens from salads, even a handful of noodles if there were some left behind. Those scraps met in the pot and became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The broth deepened in color and flavor with every passing hour, carrying the scent of care through the house. It was food that took time, that demanded patience, that rewarded frugality with comfort. The wooden spoon stirred slowly, pulling stories from the pot like memories rising with the steam. Kids waited, bowls in hand, as the kitchen fogged with warmth. Each bite tasted like love stretched thin but never broken. Nothing was wasted. Not time, not flavor, not effort. It was a reminder that even small things, when treated with respect, could become something beautiful. Vegetable soup was a testament to endurance, to gratitude, and to the art of making enough out of almost nothing. Rice and gravy supper was simplicity perfected, the kind of dinner that proved luxury had nothing to do with money. A pot of soft, steaming rice sat waiting while the skillet worked its magic. The gravy began with drippings, saved from fried chicken, pork chops, or even a Sunday roast, scraped and stirred with a wooden spoon until the bits lifted and melted into flavor. Flour and water followed, thickening it just enough to coat the back of a spoon, and then came the pepper, plenty of it. When that golden brown gravy was ladled over rice, it turned humble grains into something rich and deeply comforting. Families gathered around the table, their worries melting away with every bite. It was food that filled more than bellies. It filled the soul with calm. Even without meat, it carried the taste of patience and love, proof that a single pan and a few ingredients could build a feast. Homemade fish cakes were the ocean's gift to frugal kitchens and clever cooks. Canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna became something special when mixed with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and egg. The mixture was formed into patties, pressed firm between flour-dusted palms, and dropped into hot oil where they hissed and crackled. The smell filled the kitchen with a salty promise, the kind that made you feel rich no matter what the bank said. Each patty fried to a perfect golden brown, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of potatoes, they were a complete meal, cheap, filling, and full of pride. The secret was in the seasoning, often passed down from memory. A pinch of salt, a touch of mustard, maybe a shake of pepper. They were proof that good food came from care, not cost. Every bite was a reminder that a clever cook could make the simplest pantry taste like a banquet. Navy bean and ham bone soup was the meal that turned leftovers into legend, a dish that spoke of slow hours and full hearts. The leftover ham bone from Sunday's meal went into a big pot with dry beans, onions, and water, and from that, magic was born. It simmered for hours until the beans softened and the meat slipped from the bone. The broth turned smoky, thick, and fragrant, filling the air with a scent that could stop conversation mid-sentence. Each spoonful carried history of thrift, care, and kitchens that knew patience by name. Sometimes carrots or celery were added if the garden gave enough. Other times, it was just beans and hope. The soup was ladled into mismatched bowls, steaming and hearty, the kind of meal that made even a cold house feel warm. Every bite tasted like effort made worthwhile, like gratitude turned into nourishment. It was proof that love, when simmered slowly, could feed a family for days. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were the pride of thrifty kitchens. Mothers would line up bright green peppers on the counter, slicing off the tops and scooping out the seeds with care. A single pound of ground meat, beef if you were lucky, or whatever was on sale, was stretched with rice, onions, and breadcrumbs until it could feed the whole family. The mixture was packed into each pepper, standing tall in a baking dish before being smothered in tomato sauce. As it baked, the scent filled the house with warmth, tangy and savory all at once. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and dinner became something that looked fancy even when it cost next to nothing. Families gathered around the table, cutting through the soft vegetables to reveal the hearty filling inside. It was a meal that brought pride, not pity, proof that resourcefulness could taste like celebration. Every bite carried the balance of thrift and love, where nothing went to waste and everything felt like home. Shepherd's pie with leftover roast was the definition of reinvention, a masterpiece of thrift and comfort. Yesterday's scraps of meat were chopped fine, mixed with whatever vegetables had survived the week, and bound together with a splash of gravy. Sometimes a bit of leftover bread or oats thickened the filling, soaking up every ounce of flavor. On top went a layer of mashed potatoes, spread smooth with the back of a spoon, then dragged into peaks that browned beautifully in the oven. The smell was a blanket of warmth that wrapped the whole house. It was the kind of meal that could silence a room once served, everyone too busy savoring to speak. Families didn't need a lot to make it right, they just needed care and a cast iron dish. It was food that turned hard times into shared joy, and scarcity into something that tasted abundant. Shepherd's pie was proof that love didn't show itself in grand gestures. It showed up in leftovers turned into miracles. Cabbage rolls with ground beef and rice were a triumph of patience, skill, and unshakable hope. One head of cabbage, softened in boiling water, became the vessel for a hearty mix of rice, meat, onions, and spice. Each leaf was filled carefully, folded tight like a promise, and laid in neat rows inside a pot. Tomato sauce was poured over the top, bubbling slowly until everything came together in harmony. The scent alone could feed a soul before the first bite even touched a plate. Every roll told a story of care. A mother's hands working late into the evening, her eyes soft with purpose. The rolls were tender, flavorful, and filling, feeding large families on little more than a pound of meat. Eaten with bread to soak up the sauce, it was a dinner that made the ordinary feel special. Cabbage rolls were patience served hot, a lesson that time and love could make even the simplest food unforgettable. Goulash with elbow macaroni was the working family's secret to stretching a little into a lot. A single pot could feed everyone, bringing together canned tomatoes, noodles, and bits of ground beef or sausage in a dance of flavor and practicality. The sauce thickened as it cooked, coating every curve of macaroni in tangy, savory richness. The bubbling sound was as familiar as laughter, filling the kitchen with life. It was food for long days when the world felt heavy, but the promise of dinner made it lighter. Some added a dash of hot sauce or a spoon of sugar. Every cook had their own rhythm. No two pots of goulash ever tasted exactly the same, but they all carried the same message. You are cared for. Served with bread or nothing at all, it was the meal that proved comfort didn't come from wealth, but from togetherness. Goulash was the smell of home, the flavor of love dressed in tomato and noodles. Fried cornmeal mush was the golden child of thrift, turning yesterday's leftovers into today's satisfaction. After breakfast, leftover cornmeal porridge was poured into a loaf pan, cooled until firm, and sliced thick the next day. Each slice sizzled in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, crisping at the edges while staying soft and tender inside. The smell of corn and salt hung in the air, calling everyone to the table. Served with syrup for sweetness or gravy for heartiness, it was food that could adapt to any need. Poor families knew that nothing in the kitchen should ever go to waste, and fried mush made sure of it. The sound of it cooking was as comforting as its taste, steady, warm, and familiar. Every bite carried the quiet triumph of resourcefulness, proof that with a little creativity, even scraps could shine. It was food born from hard times but remembered for its joy. Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley were the definition of humble comfort, a meal that carried both simplicity and grace. They showed up on tables during lean times when money was scarce, yet hearts were full. Potatoes were scrubbed clean, quartered, and dropped into a pot of salted water to boil until tender enough for a fork to slide through. When drained, they glistened with steam, waiting for that golden touch of butter to melt across their surface. The parsley, freshly chopped or dried from the pantry, wasn't just garnish. It was a gesture of care, a bit of color that made the meal feel special. Some families poured a splash of milk into the pot for creaminess, others browned the butter for deeper flavor. No matter how it was done, the result was the same, a dish that satisfied both hunger and heart. The smell alone could quiet a noisy house, reminding everyone that even the plainest ingredients could feel like home. Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley weren't extravagant, but they were proof that comfort could be found in the simplest acts of cooking, where love was the main ingredient. Chicken and dumplings from scratch were the crown jewel of kitchen wisdom, the kind of meal that stretched one bird into something grand. The chicken simmered slow in a big pot of water, bones and all, until the broth turned cloudy with richness. Onions, celery, and carrots added depth, transforming the air into a promise of warmth. Then came the dumplings, rolled thin or dropped by spoon, depending on family tradition. They puffed and floated in the bubbling broth, tender and soft as memories themselves. The kitchen filled with steam and quiet anticipation as the meal came together. Every bowl was an act of love, hearty enough to chase away hunger and weariness alike. Leftovers were rare, but when they existed, they tasted even better the next day. This dish wasn't just food, it was connection, the kind that bound families through hard years and cold winters. Chicken and dumplings taught that patience and care could turn scarcity into abundance, and every bite carried that lesson forward. Homemade vegetable pot pie was the story of thrift wrapped in a crust, the kind of dinner that made ordinary ingredients feel like a celebration. Leftover vegetables, peas, corn, carrots, potatoes, were gathered into a pot, mixed with thickened broth and butter to form a creamy filling. The crust was rolled by hand, patched if needed, and laid lovingly across the top before being brushed with milk for shine. As it baked, the scent of pastry and herbs filled the home, wrapping the room in comfort. When the knife cut through that golden crust, steam rose like a sigh, carrying the fragrance of care. Every bite was soft, savory, and familiar, the essence of home-cooked love. It was a meal that stretched what little you had into something that felt complete, something that made the family sit closer and linger longer. Vegetable pot pie was more than sustenance. It was the art of making do, elevated to something tender and unforgettable. Hot water cornbread and collard greens were the Southern anthem of resilience. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water, stirred thick, and patted into cakes before hitting the hot grease, sizzling like applause. The crust turned golden and crisp, the inside soft and steaming. In another pot, collard greens simmered for hours with onions, a dash of vinegar, and the smoky whisper of salt pork or ham hock. The two dishes belonged together, one soaking up the juices of the other, both telling stories of survival. This was food born from the earth, from hands that planted and harvested, cooked and endured. The smell of greens filled the home with warmth and history, reminding families that struggle and celebration often shared the same table. Every bite carried a balance of bitterness and comfort, a harmony only time could create. Hot water cornbread and collard greens weren't just Southern staples. They were living traditions, proof that faith and flavor could rise from even the hardest soil. Spam and fried potatoes were the meal of working families who knew how to make the best of what they had. The can hissed open with a promise of salt and survival, the pink slices laid into a skillet where they browned and curled at the edges. The smell was unmistakable, savory, smoky, and satisfying. Potatoes followed, diced and fried in the leftover grease until golden and crisp, soaking up every ounce of flavor. The result was a plate that felt both hearty and homely, feeding everyone without fuss or waste. It was food that asked for nothing fancy, just a frying pan, a bit of oil, and the will to make it work. For many, it was the taste of wartime resilience and post-war routine, a dish that stayed on tables long after ration books were gone. Spam and potatoes were proof that love didn't need luxury. It just needed warmth, effort, and the shared joy of a hot meal after a long day. Macaroni and tomatoes were the taste of thrift wrapped in comfort. Boiled pasta was mixed with stewed tomatoes, butter, and a sprinkle of salt and pepper, coming together into something far greater than the sum of its parts. It was tangy, hearty, and filling enough to satisfy a house full of hungry stomachs on pennies. Sometimes a chopped onion or pinch of sugar was added to soften the acidity, and occasionally a bit of bacon or cheese made its way in when fortune allowed. But the truth was, it didn't need a thing. The sauce clung to every curve of the noodles, and the butter gave it a warmth that felt like home. Families who had little still sat down to bowls of this with pride, passing around plates and smiles as if they were feasting. It was food that proved joy could be simple, that dignity could be delicious. For many, macaroni and tomatoes were more than a meal. They were memory, comfort, and survival served hot. Cabbage and noodles, Haluski style, was an immigrant gift that became a Depression-era staple across working-class homes. The ingredients were humble: shredded cabbage sautéed in butter or lard, mixed with soft egg noodles and seasoned with salt and pepper. Sometimes onions or bits of bacon were added if the budget allowed, but even without extras, the dish was satisfying in every way. It was sweet, savory, and filling, food that hugged the stomach and soothed the soul. Families of Eastern European roots brought it to steel towns and mining camps, and soon neighbors of every background adopted it. The smell of butter-browned cabbage filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, a scent that felt like comfort itself. This dish carried stories of endurance and migration, of women who made plenty out of scarcity and shared it freely. Haluski wasn't glamorous. It was grounding. It reminded everyone that simple ingredients, treated with care, could taste like love. Stewed okra and tomatoes were the pride of every home gardener, a dish that captured summer's soul in a pot. When gardens brimmed with green and red, mothers picked the last of the season's bounty and turned it into something hearty, fragrant, and full of love. The okra was sliced thin, the tomatoes chopped rough, and both were simmered low with onions, garlic, and a touch of salt pork or butter. As they cooked, the house filled with a smell that was equal parts earth and sunlight, tangy and sweet all at once. The okra's natural thickness gave the stew body, while the tomatoes melted down into a sauce that clung lovingly to every bite. It was spooned over rice or cornbread, shared straight from the pot, and stretched to feed whoever showed up hungry. Every mouthful tasted like care, fresh, honest, and made with hands that understood patience. This dish didn't need luxury to feel rich. It carried the flavor of hard work and homegrown pride. Stewed okra and tomatoes were proof that food grown from the earth and cooked with heart could feed both body and spirit. Peanut butter soup was one of those Depression-era wonders that made little feel like plenty. Families took what they had, a jar of peanut butter, a splash of milk, and a spoon of sugar, and turned it into something warm, filling, and full of life. The peanut butter melted into the milk, thickening into a creamy base that was sweet, nutty, and oddly comforting. Some cooks added a pinch of salt, others stirred in oats or mashed bananas to make it stretch further, and every version carried the same homemade goodness. It wasn't fancy, but it stuck to the ribs and warmed the soul. Children loved its sweetness. Parents loved its practicality. Served in chipped bowls or poured over toast, it filled bellies and lifted spirits during days when food was scarce and hope ran thin. Its smell, roasted peanuts and sugar warming over the stove, was the scent of creativity and care. Peanut butter soup was more than just survival food. It was love disguised as invention, proof that kindness could live even in the leanest kitchens. Corn chowder with salt pork was the golden comfort of the lean years, rich in spirit if not in ingredients. Sweet corn, fresh when possible, canned when not, was simmered with diced potatoes, onions, and bits of salt pork that gave it a smoky depth. The pork fried first, popping and sizzling as its fat rendered out, before milk was poured in to create a thick, creamy base. The chowder simmered slow, its scent wrapping the house in buttery warmth. Each spoonful was hearty, sweet, and full of quiet reassurance. It was food that didn't try to impress. It simply made you feel safe, full, and grateful. The dish stretched easily, feeding big families with little cost, and it always tasted like home. Served with crackers or crusty bread, it filled empty stomachs and soothed weary hearts. Corn chowder wasn't about indulgence. It was about care, patience, and knowing that love was the secret ingredient all along. Fried rice with leftover meat bits was a meal built from instinct, a masterpiece of thrift and flavor. Cold rice, saved from yesterday's dinner, met the heat of a skillet slick with oil or bacon grease. Diced onions, carrots, and scraps of ham or sausage joined the mix, sizzling until everything caramelized. The rice crisped around the edges, soaking up every bit of fat and flavor. A splash of soy sauce or dash of salt tied it all together, though each cook added their own twist, maybe a pinch of pepper or a beaten egg stirred in at the end. It was a meal that tasted like care and resourcefulness, a way of saying nothing here will be wasted. Families loved it because it was quick, cheap, and endlessly adaptable. Fried rice was proof that cooking wasn't about what you had, it was about what you could make of it. Baked beans with brown bread was the Saturday night supper that generations grew up on. Dried navy beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours in a mixture of molasses, brown sugar, mustard, and bits of salt pork until the sauce turned glossy and rich. The house filled with the deep, sweet scent of slow cooking, a smell that meant warmth, patience, and tradition. Brown bread, dark and soft from molasses and rye flour, was steamed or baked alongside. When served together, they balanced perfectly, the bread's sweetness against the beans' smoky depth. This was food for gatherings, for family stories told between spoonfuls. Even when times were hard, baked beans and brown bread turned simplicity into ritual. It wasn't expensive, but it was abundant in comfort, flavor, and meaning. Each pot carried history and heart, proving that the best meals aren't about wealth, they're about time, care, and the love stirred in with every turn of the spoon. Homemade meatloaf with oats was a true invention of necessity, a dish that turned resourcefulness into ritual. Families who couldn't afford much still managed to create something that felt rich and filling. Ground beef was stretched with rolled oats or crushed crackers, onions, and eggs, ingredients that added texture, flavor, and volume. The mixture was packed into a loaf pan, brushed with ketchup or tomato paste, and baked slowly until it browned at the edges and filled the home with the smell of comfort. The top caramelized beautifully, forming a sticky, sweet glaze that everyone fought to get a slice of. Each serving was dense but tender, hearty without being heavy. Served with mashed potatoes or bread, it made a full meal out of the humblest ingredients. Families passed recipes down through generations, tweaking the spices or sauces, but never losing the spirit of the dish. Meatloaf wasn't just dinner, it was the story of survival baked into form. It reminded people that even in lean times, love could still taste like abundance. Buttermilk cornbread pudding was the sweet ending to a long day's work, born from the habit of never wasting a crumb. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into a pan, soaked in buttermilk, sugar, and a few eggs, then baked until golden and bubbling at the edges. The result was soft and custardy, rich with tang and sweetness. Families who had little turned this into something extraordinary, a dessert that cost almost nothing but tasted like a celebration. Served warm with a drizzle of syrup or a spoon of butter, it filled the room with quiet joy. The flavor was simple, but the feeling was grand. Buttermilk cornbread pudding showed that the same bread that fed you through hard times could also bring comfort when the world finally slowed down. It was thrift turned into tenderness, poverty turned into pride, and warmth turned into sweetness. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins brought Christmas mornings to life with a smell that felt like home. Grandparents sliced soft red apples, tossing them with butter, brown sugar, and a handful of raisins in an old baking dish. The oven worked slow, turning everything tender and golden, the edges bubbling with caramelized syrup. The scent of cinnamon filled every corner, warm and familiar. It was a dish that didn't need luxury, only love and patience. Served warm, it tasted like memory. Sweet, rich, and comforting in its simplicity. Children spooned it over biscuits or ate it plain, steam rising as they smiled through each bite. It was dessert for breakfast, comfort for cold mornings, and love disguised as thrift. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins reminded families that Christmas joy could come from the simplest things pulled from a pantry and shared with care. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins brought Christmas mornings to life with a smell that felt like home. Grandparents sliced soft red apples, tossing them with butter, brown sugar, and a handful of raisins in an old baking dish. The oven worked slow, turning everything tender and golden, the edges bubbling with caramelized syrup. The scent of cinnamon filled every corner, warm and familiar. It was a dish that didn't need luxury, only love and patience. Served warm, it tasted like memory. Sweet, rich, and comforting in its simplicity. Children spooned it over biscuits or ate it plain, steam rising as they smiled through each bite. It was dessert for breakfast, comfort for cold mornings, and love disguised as thrift. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins reminded families that Christmas joy could come from the simplest things pulled from a pantry and shared with care. Raisin bread pudding with vanilla sauce was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. Stale bread became a canvas for transformation, soaked in milk, sweetened, and brought to life again. Raisins added richness, plumping up in the heat until they burst with syrupy sweetness. The pudding baked slowly, filling the air with the smell of nutmeg and brown sugar. And then came the best part. The vanilla sauce, smooth and glossy, poured over the warm pudding like kindness itself. This dish carried the rhythm of old kitchens, where creativity was the difference between scarcity and abundance. At Christmas, it was often served as the grand finale, simple yet deeply satisfying. Every spoonful was soft, comforting, and impossibly nostalgic. It was more than a way to stretch ingredients. It was a way to stretch joy. Crocheted tree skirts and doilies carried quiet elegance born from patience. Grandmothers sat by lamplight, looping yarn into delicate lace that would outlast decades, their fingers moving with rhythm learned from years of care. Each piece had its own story, whether it was made during hard winters or long summers of waiting. Placed under Christmas trees, the skirts caught falling pine needles like soft snow, protecting the floor while adding a touch of grace. Over tables, doilies framed bowls of fruit or sweet potato pie cooling for guests. They were made to be both beautiful and useful, the perfect balance of pride and practicality. Younger generations watched, sometimes learning, sometimes just marveling at how something so intricate came from simple thread. No store-bought decoration ever carried that kind of soul. When the holidays ended, they were folded away like treasures, waiting to shine again next December. Smothered turkey wings were the kind of meal that filled a house before you even sat down to eat. The slow-baked wings simmered in their own juices, bathed in a gravy so rich and brown it seemed to hold generations of flavor. In many African-American Southern homes, this dish wasn't just food, it was a celebration of resourcefulness, a reminder that even the simplest cuts could taste like royalty. The wings were seasoned with onions, garlic, and a touch of pepper, then baked until the meat nearly fell from the bone. Once smothered in the thick pan gravy, they transformed into something divine, something that could silence an entire table mid-bite. On Christmas, when money might have been tight but spirits were high, this dish symbolized the best of soul food. Slow, loving, made to last. The gravy wasn't just poured, it was ladled like a blessing over rice, mashed potatoes, or soft cornbread. Every forkful carried comfort and patience, as if time itself had seasoned it. Smothered turkey wings were about stretching flavor, turning effort into abundance. The sound of bubbling broth, the smell of onions caramelizing, it was all part of the ritual. In every bite lived a legacy, and in every kitchen, the memory of someone who knew how to make a little go a long way. Sweet potato tea cakes were the taste of Christmas love, hand-shaped and baked with care when pie fixings were too dear. Mashed sweet potatoes took the place of expensive butter, giving each cake a soft golden hue and a sweetness all its own. The dough was mixed in big wooden bowls, rolled out on floured tables, and cut into circles by jar lids or tin cups. When they came out of the oven, the air turned rich with spice and sugar. These little cakes were passed around in napkins at church socials or packed for neighbors as gifts. Each one told a story of resourceful joy, how something so simple could still feel special. Children waited by the stove for the first warm bite, soft and fragrant in their hands. Sweet potato tea cakes were humble and heavenly, proof that love could rise even without plenty. Homemade sausage patties filled the house with a smell that felt like joy itself. Grandparents seasoned ground pork with sage, pepper, and salt, mixing it slow by hand. They shaped the meat into patties and laid them in a hot skillet, the sizzle echoing through the kitchen. The grease popped, the air thick with spice and smoke. Each patty browned perfectly, crisp on the edges, tender inside. Served beside biscuits or grits, they became the centerpiece of Christmas breakfast. The flavor was warm and full-bodied, carrying a balance of salt and heat that felt like comfort itself. These sausages didn't come from a store. They came from love, from knowledge passed down through generations. Families sat close, plates piled high, laughter ringing through the air. Homemade sausage patties weren't just breakfast, they were the sound and smell of home on Christmas morning. Cornbread dressing with sage and gizzards was never written down. It was remembered. The smell alone could pull everyone into the kitchen before the pan even left the oven. The dressing was moist, peppery, and full of flavor that came from slow-simmered broth and scraps of meat that no one wasted. Every piece of gizzard, onion, and cornbread crumb had purpose. Women learned it by watching their mothers crumble bread by hand, stir broth until it felt right, and season not by measure but by memory. The sage gave it that unmistakable holiday taste, earthy and warm, tied to the idea of family coming home. This dish carried the spirit of resilience, using every bit of the bird and turning it into something worth celebrating. It stood proudly beside the turkey, sometimes outshining it. In church kitchens and home gatherings alike, pans of dressing were baked in iron skillets and passed down the table like heirlooms. The sound of the first spoon breaking through the crust was enough to hush a room. This was Christmas in its truest form, made from scratch, filled with care, and meant to feed both body and soul. Sequin stockings brought shimmer to homes that believed in making the most of what they had. Mothers and daughters sat together on living room floors, stitching and gluing sequins onto old stockings until they sparkled like starlight. No one bought new ones. They reinvented the old. Gold, red, and green reflected under Christmas bulbs as if each stitch held its own wish. Every stocking looked different, personal, and proud. Kids hung them by the mantel and watched the light dance across them. Even if the seams weren't perfect, they carried more love than anything store-bought. The sequins would fall off by January, but by then, the memory had already taken root. Each glittering thread said the same thing. We may not have much, but we make beauty out of what's ours. Wild blackberry cobbler was one of the simplest desserts, but also one of the most joyful, pulled straight from the land itself. Families and children foraged blackberries along fences, ditches, and backfields, filling tin pails with whatever they could gather. The berries were tart and often scratched from brambles, but once baked into a cobbler with biscuit dough or cornmeal crust, they became a dish of celebration. Sugar was scarce, but even a little was enough to transform the berries into something special. Cobbler was not just food, it was an event, often marking the height of summer when blackberries ripened. Children loved the sweetness, licking their fingers after every bite, while adults cherished the memory of turning foraged fruit into dessert. In a time of scarcity, wild blackberry cobbler proved that joy could still be found in simple things. It was survival with sweetness, a reminder that nature still offered gifts even under the weight of Jim Crow oppression. Baked macaroni pie was where comfort met celebration. Unlike its modern boxed cousin, this dish was rich, homemade, and soulful. Layers of tender pasta held together by eggs, milk, and sharp cheddar cheese. African-American families treated it as more than a side. It was a centerpiece of holiday tables. The top baked to a perfect crust, golden and bubbling, while the inside stayed creamy and soft. Every bite carried the flavor of home, of effort, and pride. Long before convenience foods arrived, this was what macaroni and cheese meant, a dish born from community cookbooks, perfected in cast-iron pans. Children waited eagerly for the first cut, watching the steam rise as it hit the cool December air. The smell filled the room, mingling with baked ham, greens, and sweet yams, forming the true symphony of Christmas dinner. Baked macaroni pie was more than sustenance. It was identity. It told a story of creativity born from scarcity, of making something extraordinary from what you had. That first creamy, cheesy forkful said everything about love that words couldn't. Collard greens with ham hocks were the soul of Christmas cooking long before anyone called it soul food. A pot of greens simmered all day on the stove, the smoky meat from leftover ham bones slowly melting into the broth. Each leaf softened into silk, soaking up the flavor of salt, smoke, and thyme. The rich scent wrapped itself around the house, promising something steady and strong. Collards were more than food. They were ritual. On Christmas Day, they stood for good fortune, health, and survival. Every family had their own way, a pinch of pepper here, a spoon of vinegar there, each pot telling a story passed down in taste, not words. When served with cornbread to soak up the potlikker, the meal became a full blessing. Collard greens and ham hocks fed more than hunger. They fed heritage. Liver pudding with cornbread was a breakfast that made use of both thrift and tradition. Liver pudding, made from ground pork liver mixed with spices and grain, was sliced and fried until warm and fragrant. Served alongside crumbled cornbread, it created a dish that was hearty, filling, and economical. Though the flavor was bold, it was respected as a nutritious way to stretch meat and ensure nothing went to waste. African-American kitchens relied on dishes like this to feed large families affordably, making liver pudding a familiar sight at the morning table. The pairing with cornbread added comfort and balance, giving a soft texture to go with the savory richness of the pudding. For many, this dish was a reminder of resilience and resourcefulness. Though it is rarely prepared today, liver pudding with cornbread once carried both pride and practicality in every bite. Sweet potato pie from scratch was the heart of every African-American Christmas table, more memory than recipe. Sweet potatoes were boiled and mashed smooth, whipped with butter, sugar, and a touch of cinnamon until they turned sunset orange. Some added evaporated milk, others a splash of vanilla or lemon extract, but all baked with love. The crust crackled golden beneath the filling, and the air filled with the perfume of nutmeg and joy. Grandmothers hummed gospel hymns while stirring, their rhythm matching the beat of the whisk. Children waited at the edge of the counter, eager to lick the spoon. Each slice held the taste of patience and the sound of laughter echoing through small kitchens. No dessert carried more soul. It was sweet but grounded, humble but proud. Long after dinner ended, its scent lingered in the house like a hymn. It wasn't just pie. It was a story baked into tradition, one that didn't need measuring cups to get right. Passed through generations, it was the dessert that defined a people's perseverance and love, written not on paper, but in memory. When the first bite melted, everyone knew this was home, and home was enough. If these dinners reminded you of your grandparents' kitchen, share your favorite memory in the comments, like the video, and subscribe so we can keep their recipes and their stories alive together.